You know, I really like video games. Immersing yourself in another world, doing superhuman feats like jumping 10 feet into the air, sprinting 20 miles per hour, reacting to events with the reflexes of a demigod. It's fun. A good departure from my boring existence as a university student selling phone repairs and accessories at the local mall. For years, we've dreamed of soaring past our physical limitations. We've pushed ourselves, setting records that were previously believed to be unattainable.
Building technologies that once lived solely in our imagination.
But now, we're not aiming to improve the speed of our internet.
We're not looking for a faster car.
Or a better computer.
We are looking to create a better human.
Well, not us, obviously, but we are going to talk about it.
Throughout the many years we've been here, humanity has come up with different ways to make our lives better, in various different ways. Whether it's improving physical performance through the use of state-of-the-art sports apparel, protein shakes, energy drinks, improving our physical health with vitamins, improving our mental health with apps or therapy, we've always had an interest in bettering ourselves and our lives. That's where genetic engineering comes into play. It's the controversial technology of altering our genetic code to achieve the impossible. With genetic engineering, the possibilities are endless. We can engineer our looks, our height, how muscular we can get, our intelligence. We can get rid of certain diseases, create vaccines. It's truly an amazing technology. Genetic engineering will save the world.
Now to the latest on the coronavirus.
The coronavirus.
COVID-19.
To the coronavirus outbreak.
Today, I want to talk about coronavirus.
Wear a mask.
You got to try to the best of your ability to have your social interactions in a modified way.
Governor Newsom.
If you cannot practice physical distancing, then are you practicing love?
Vitamin D, vitamin C. So we have everything that we need. We don't need a vaccine.
It's something that's impacted all of us. This coronavirus. It's taken lives, it's ruined lives, it's changed everything. Social distancing, masks, online school, outside dining, the new norms due to the virus. Economies have been ravaged too, causing many to lose their jobs, close down their businesses, and change their way of life for the entirety of 2020. Let's shift the tone, shall we? Ah, yes, that's better. Good old capitalism. Gotta love the ever-growing gap between the rich and the poor, right? Just this morning, I read about the mighty Musk's wealth levels approaching those of Bezos. The rich getting richer. Wonder what else is new. Economics is the study of how we allocate our scarce/limited resources. Don't worry, you can trust everything I'm about to say. I'll have you know I almost passed my macroeconomics AP test. I'm basically an expert on this stuff. Good! Now that I've established credibility, let's talk about the economy. Let's start with the simple stuff. In the US economy, you can generally tell how good we are doing by looking at three things: inflation, the unemployment rate, and yearly GDP growth. Don't know what any of these things are? You're good, bud! I've got you covered. Welcome to my TED Talk. We're just going to talk about unemployment though for this video to keep it simple. The unemployment rate. The higher it is, the worse off we are. Basically, it represents the percentage of people who don't have a job but are looking for one. A healthy percentage is generally between 3 to 4%. Before Corona, we were doing great. The 2019 rate was 3.7% according to Statista.com. However, after the virus ravaged our livelihoods, that rose to about 6.9% as of October of 2020. That is a horrible number. Sure, these might just be numbers, but they illustrate a much darker reality. Local businesses closing down, breadwinners of families losing jobs, renters being at risk of getting evicted. Bad stuff.
Moving past the economical impacts, our personal lives have been changed through the coronavirus guidelines. Masks have largely become the new norm. You need to have one everywhere you go. Social distancing is expected. Handshakes are no longer polite. Now we have that awkward elbow touch or a simple nod to greet each other instead. Small restaurants have struggled to adapt, resorting to using services like Grubhub, Uber Eats, or DoorDash, who take a cut off the already slim profit margins. For a while, some businesses were forced by the government to close down. Visiting family and friends became strongly discouraged. Partying became demonized. Naturally, new products rose to popularity due to our new lives. ProctorU and Zoom became utilized by schools. A lot more people began to purchase online game memberships to stay connected with their friends. Masks, after the initial supply shortage, became much more personalized and widely sold. People even started buying face shields to try to get around the discomfort of wearing a face mask.
For the last year, we've been searching for a vaccine, and we are getting close. But before we discuss our current position, let's think. How did we get here? What technological developments led up to the form of modern vaccines?
Right about now, you're probably wondering, how did people not die of deadly disease before vaccines were invented? Well, the thing is, they did die. A lot of people died, in fact. In the year 735, Japan actually suffered a smallpox epidemic that killed roughly 1/3 of their population. Humans, however, being the clever monkeys that they are, developed methods to reduce the risk of disease. Variolation is widely known as a precursor to vaccination. The process goes a little something like this. Step 1. You take some pus or scabs or other bodily fluid from an individual infected with the disease. Step 2. You scratch your skin a bit and introduce the fluid into your body. Step 3. Wait for maybe about a week as you develop the symptoms of the disease. Step 4. Hopefully, afterwards, this disease would not have been too severe and the symptoms would have been gone by now. Congratulations, you're now immune to the disease. Now you don't have to die a horrible death. Before vaccination, variolation was widely used to give people immunity to diseases like smallpox and measles. The earliest known use of variolation was from China in the 1500s, where the scabs formed by smallpox patients would be blown up one's nose to try and develop immunity. It's kind of like what the neighborhood moms planned when they devised a measles party to let their children quote-unquote get over it. Oh, but that's what the ancients did back then, and they turned out just fine, you say. Well, you know what else they did back then? They also died of disease back then, Karen. They suffered some of the most agonizing and some of the most painful deaths possible in that time period, Karen. Sure, variolation worked to induce immunity, but there was still the significant risk of severe infection and spread of the virus. Up to 1% of variolated individuals died because a developing infection became too severe. King George III lost a son to variolation, Karen. Do you really want to take that chance with your own child, Karen? Meet this guy. His name is Edward Jenner, English physician, member of the Royal Society, and the reason you're alive right now. He is best known for laying the groundwork for the development of vaccination. One day, he noticed dairy maids tended to be immune to smallpox, even if not traditionally inoculated. He went to a farm with a cow that was experiencing cowpox, a disease similar to smallpox, but harmless in humans. He inoculated a young boy with the cowpox material. The typical infection stage followed, but had much milder effects. After the infection had subsided, Jenner inoculated the boy with actual smallpox, but this time, no infection followed. Jenner had successfully performed the first vaccination, which was much safer than traditional variolation. Edward Jenner's research spurred the development of subsequent safer vaccines for many other diseases like polio, measles, mumps, rubella, and many others that had plagued the world at the time. His contributions to immunology are so influential that they surely would have won them the Nobel Prize if Nobel had been alive back then. Since then, smallpox was subsequently eradicated in 1979. Polio was also eradicated in the US around this time too, though cases still appear in other underdeveloped countries. Malaria had been declared eradicated in most of Europe and America. This was only possible through the implementation of widespread vaccine usage and efforts to develop the vaccines to keep up with evolving viruses. It is only thanks to vaccination that other diseases that have not yet been eradicated, like influenza and tuberculosis, are only significantly less fatal, numerous, and debilitating than they would have been otherwise. So remember to thank Edward Jenner tonight for the fact that you are not bedridden right now. And remember to think about that the next time you want to stick it to Big Pharma, Karen.
Great! Stab ourselves with a bit of the flu and boom, we are immune. However, over time we've developed much more complex methods of vaccination. Much more effective methods using genetic engineering. The general process of how these vaccines are produced goes a bit like this.
The process of making a vaccine requires 3 main steps: animal testing, human trials, and manufacturing. All vaccines require animal testing in order to continue onto human trials. This way, developers know that their samples are safe for humans. CGTN's interview about a single lab at Fuji University in Shanghai reports that more than 100 mice are required for their first run of COVID-19 vaccine tests. Only if the first tests were successful, then they would continue on to separate trials on monkeys. That is for just one lab. Meanwhile, in the United States, the CDC has stated studies for COVID have been run on mice, pigs, chickens, ducks, cats, dogs, ferrets, bats, hamsters, shrews, rhesus macaques, cynomolgus macaques, grivets, and marmosets. According to the FDA, only 8% of drugs tested on animals proved to be effective in humans. Ethics in COVID-19 vaccine development do not only concern animals. Human trials come next. The average amount of time typically spent trying to develop a vaccine usually takes 10 years. However, due to the urgency of COVID, developers and government are encouraging that a new vaccine will be released in 1.5 years instead. The White House has enacted Operation Warp Speed, an attempt to boost vaccine development with funds. So far, they have funded 5 of the most promising companies. 4 to 5 of these companies are well-seasoned and developed: Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Merck. The only newcomer being Moderna. Concerns also shift towards the FDA. as they are being expected to consider an emergency use authorization in order to speed up the approval process of a vaccine if they in fact worked. All this depends on human trial time. Usually, there are 3 sequential phases in a human trial. However, developers have been attempting to speed up these phases in 2 questionable ways. The 2 options include overlapping phase 2 and 3 in human trials, as well as manufacturing ahead of time, or considering a challenge trial instead of a phase 3 trial. A challenge trial deliberately infects the person after taking the vaccine. In a normal phase 3 trial, a test subject would have to contract the virus in the wild. However, due to the use of masks and quarantine, this version of the trial would take longer if the subject were to follow current COVID-19 safety measures. Instead, companies are considering giving the vaccinated person the virus on purpose. However, in doing so, only a small group of people are qualified for this type of testing, young, healthy adults. It is uncertain how a vaccine that would work for this group would work for a group of older subjects, or patients. Is it ethical to endanger human lives for the sake of urgency?
A new development in the world of vaccine technology is using gene-based vaccines. Gene-based vaccines use the genetic code of the virus to create a blueprint of certain antigens. They encode this into DNA or RNA and inject this into you, eventually reaching your cells. Your cells then produce the encoded antigens, which is very similar to something that a vaccine or virus would do normally, and the immune system responds much like it does with a conventional vaccine. There are 3 main types. One uses a DNA plasmid to transfer the encoded virus, the second just injects RNA into you, and the third uses another harmless virus to deliver the needed DNA. There are a couple of problems regarding these different methods, though. The first method is harder to introduce into cells. The second vaccine is less stable than other approaches since RNA denatures at higher temperatures. And with the third approach, the immune system might attack the virus carrying the vaccine. There are also some potential dangers to using a gene-based vaccine as well. It's possible that the vaccine will worsen the symptoms of COVID-19, as was found in testing a SARS vaccine on ferrets. Scaling up the COVID vaccine and producing it at high numbers might prove difficult, as this has never been done before. Other genetic engineering and medical tech ethics. For instance, genetically modified organisms are common today. Also known as GMOs, these are often used in agriculture and food production, where their genomes have been modified in order to improve growth, nutritional content, pest resistance, sustainability, and ease of farming. GMO crops are incredibly common in the US. At least 90% of soy, cotton, and corn grown are modified. There's a lot of concern about the healthiness of GMOs, but they are completely safe. The true problem with GMOs is the way in which GMO corporations conduct themselves. GMO companies aren't just creating GMO foods, they're creating entire systems that can control the farming cycle and block out competitors. Farms often find it hard to keep up with GMO corporations, since if any GMO seeds get into and contaminate their fields, they need to pay the corporations as GMOs are patented, or they use up lots of money trying to keep any contamination out. There's also a lot of monopolization within the GMO industry. A lot of the food we consume comes from smaller farms, which save seeds and don't use GMO seeds. But the mergers could change political policies to favor the corporations and could drive smaller farms out of business. There is also research to suggest that increasing industrial agriculture has a large ecological impact, with a major loss of biodiversity and by contributing to climate change. There are also ethical problems in the medical industry. Insulin, necessary for people with type 1 diabetes, is hard to access for some people. The pharmaceutical market is focused solely on making profit, and the idea that they make medicine that people need to live is diminished over time. We can see this with insulin, as the prices have increased, which cannot be justified by increases in cost to produce insulin, even with the switch from animal-based to synthetic. Also, many governments have taxes or tariffs on medication like insulin, and this can affect access to medication. Hidden costs can increase the price of insulin by 17-fold, and governments have not yet passed much regulation regarding this. Without access to insulin, people with type 1 diabetes die. So how ethical are these practices? There's also a question of how new technologies will affect the medical industry. Big data is playing an increasing role in the ways in which medical professionals make decisions. This raises questions about whether data-driven decisions are dehumanizing patients. With the increase in computing power and analytics, it is now much easier for computers to draw conclusions about people's health. But this method lacks a human element. Should an algorithm alone decide upon whether or not to end a loved one who has a terminal illness's life? Also, many people's entire medical history is now digitized. This allows for easier sharing of information between doctors, but also raises concerns about privacy. There are also many services that analyze large swaths of data to find trends between different classes of people, which could be helpful to medical practitioners, but it could also lead to problems if the data become public, where insurance companies, landlords, and employers could use it to their advantage. Even when this information is made anonymous, it can still be referenced with other public records and can be matched with people. One of the new developments in medicine has been customized medicine, things like the creation of identical limbs or organs that have been printed. They seem like life-saving technology, but it also raises questions about who will have access to these treatments, and brings up issues with universal health care and income level. Finally, with the rise of COVID-19 and the overflowing of hospital beds, healthcare workers are now in positions where they are forced to decide who gets to be admitted into the hospital and who is turned away. How can that be balanced?
We have already seen both the good and bad impacts of genetic engineering, but that begs the question, where do we go from here? Our understanding of methods like CRISPR are only increasing. Things once thought to be a pipe dream, now potentially a few decades away. How far will humans take genetic engineering? And what problems will arise with it? In terms of science and technology as a whole, genetic engineering is still a fairly new topic. According to newengineer.com, 37% of the American public said that genetically modified foods were safe to eat in 2015, compared to 88% of scientists at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Only discovered in 1973 by Herbert Boyer and Stanley Cohen, there is still a lot of room for the science to grow. In a sense, it could be considered the next step in artificial selection, giving the term selective breeding a whole new definition. We've already seen genetically modified plants, animals, and even the beginnings of modified humans. A scientist in China modified the embryos of a pair of twins, immunizing them to HIV. Since genetic engineering is such a new science, faster and more efficient methods are constantly being developed. One such method is gene therapy, which essentially replaces a mutated gene with a healthy copy, instead of using surgery or drugs. While this method is still in experimentation stages, it has already been used to completely cure a patient with HIV by giving patients a gene from a donor with immunity. In the future, we could see gene therapy help cure diseases that were previously thought to be untreatable. CRISPR, another method of genetic engineering, has been used since 1987. However, it is one of the most efficient methods of genetic engineering and holds a lot of potential for the future. CRISPR was originally used to create proteins that attack viruses and foreign bacteria. However, scientists have manipulated it so it can essentially be used to edit genes. As you can probably guess, the possibilities for this are truly extensive. Even right now, CRISPR is being used in testing related to COVID-19. Jamie Metzl, a technology futurist and sci-fi novelist, predicts that in the future, CRISPR could create drought-resistant crops, remove hereditary disease, and even create designer babies. But before we design babies, we must first learn to replicate them, right? Many of us have heard of it already. Cloning, creating an exact replica, genetically identical. It may come as a shock, but we may see this happen the soonest out of all the other products I mentioned. The first mammal clone, Dolly the sheep, is old news, born all the way back in 1996. In December of 2017, 2 long-tailed crab-eating macacas were born, and these primates were genetic clones of each other. At the point science is at right now, creating a human clone is not impossible. Robin Lovell-Badge, a developmental biologist and stem cell scientist at the Francis Crick Institute in London, makes a good point in saying, "No one's really suggested any good reason for doing it. Sure, a genetic clone could be made of a lost pet or family member. The problem lies in that although they may be genetically identical, their minds are not. But I'll leave that discussion for the transhumanism group."
Great! Worldwide pandemic will be gone once we use our good old genetic engineering to show that Rona who's boss. Hey, remember when I said it was controversial?
Inevitably, the further from natural we stray, the more questions will be asked. Is it ethical to modify embryos? Who will get access to designer babies with custom appearance, height, and even IQ? Will there be conflict between societies about who can create the best human? There has been talk of making humans more resistant to climate change, and that brings up a whole separate discussion in itself. Do the pros outweigh the cons? Eliminating disease, prolonging life, making the average human faster, stronger, and smarter, but at what cost?
It's good though, because this isn't the first time that groundbreaking technology has been used for nefarious purposes. It's good that people are skeptical and worried. It'll keep the use of this tech on track. Ethics must not take the back seat during innovation. Yes, this technology has the potential to help many people, but it can also become a curse. I mean, think about it. Tensions can arise between those who were genetically engineered and those who weren't. What if those who were engineered develop a superiority complex, start a war? We could also become much better off as a society though, making people stronger and more resilient, resulting in efficiency increasing across all sectors of the economy. Maybe we'll be able to reach the stars and colonize them much faster than we are now. Maybe we'll solve world hunger, find a solution to poverty using our new resources. This technology is far off though. It'll be years before we develop our technologies this well. For now, we'll have to settle for a cure to a world-ending virus. It's a shame. I always wondered how I'd look as a blonde.